All right, just a reminder, we're going to be off next week. All right, I'm in Boston. I have to go rub it into the Patriots. So I'm doing the voting nights for that. That's not the goal, but that will happen at some point. But we'll be back on the following week. We'll have this is our third session. There's 6 sessions, so we got 3 more after this one. So just a heads up of what's going on. Hey, Frank, we'll jump into our talk about escapism and in our groups. Father, just got our talk, our discussions, our time just meeting new guys. I pray that we would sharpen each other, that we would be honest with each other. I pray that you bring us as men closer to you and closer to each other. We need each other. You created us for each other to build and to sharpen it. So just pray that this would be a time of that. And again, use this just to inform us, encourage us, even challenge us in how we handle work and specifically how we escape into or from it. So I pray this in Christ's name. All right, we are 3 weeks in, and just a kind of reminder of our definitions. So you got just the categories of work. Just a reminder of work, very simply, energy expended. Rest is energy recovered. Recreation is energy diverted. And then today we're going to talk about energy corrupted, escape, which is an important idea for us because it can seem like it's recreation or rest, but it actually might be escape. Kind of where we've been, we saw that we are workers because God is a worker. He works, and so we work, and it's the way we reflect Him. It's wired into our DNA as men. Remember, He creates the man first, and then He gives him instructions, and He has him working, and then He creates Eve. So we correspond to the earth, which is why work is so significant for us. It's kind of wired in how we are. And the earth wasn't fruitful, so God creates the man. The man wasn't fruitful, so God created the woman. And then we talked about the fall and how that just corrupts everything and how it makes it a mess. And even your first blank there underneath her is that corruption is a part of the biblical story and part of our story. And we can't just blame Adam because we're part of that, but corruption happens. And then we talked some of the results of that last week, that work is frustrating because of it. It always will be. There will always be struggle. It will always be hard to close the deal, or not every deal, but there's always going to be frustration around it. There's a temporal nature of it. I talked about that last week. You're working for all this stuff, and it won't last. And you can say that's depressing, it's frustrating, and it's temporal. And then the third thing is that it's an easy idol for men because it's one of the most readily available idols because that's part of who we are. And so that's kind of where we've been. Then we're going to talk about escape. Shouldn't take us too long. It's kind of 2 big ideas. But your blank there is escape is when I hide from responsibility. Right? I hide from responsibility. And it can take 2 forms. Indolence, 2 kind of new words for us. And the ideas will maybe not be new, but maybe the words are. But the idea of indolence and then the idea of exigence. Okay, and these are 2 flip sides. They're 2 exact opposites. And we'll kind of unpack them. But the idea of hiding from responsibility, just like Adam hides, what happens when sin enters? First thing he does, they're hiding from each other, they're hiding from God. God says, "Where are you?" Refusing to accept responsibility. And so that's the idea of escape. And so indolence is an undervaluing of work, and it's an escape from work. All right, so your blank there is it's an undervaluing of work and results in the escape from work. Okay, the actual word indolence is actually a medical term that's used of a wound that won't heal. Right, it's been treated, but it's unresponsive. And the idea is some of the things of laziness will be in here, where you elevate pleasure and comfort over responsibility, or even false accomplishment. And it's ultimately rooted in some pride that this doesn't really matter. I matter. My needs, my desires, my comfort. I don't see how this work matters. You see, this is kind of a very, not to slam the younger guys, but a lot of younger generation guys. Well, what's the point? As long as I can just, work 15 hours a week and go to the beach and surf, that's great. That mentality. Not, our definition of manhood, accepting responsibility, leading courageously, rejecting passivity. It's actually the opposite.
So it shirks responsibility, and it seeks sometimes accomplishment without hard work. All right. The other side is exigence. Exigence is escape into work. It overvalues work, and it results as an escape into work, which is clearly, probably in our context, for most of us, the more pressing of the two is what we talk about. But it's the idea of too much weight in work. So workaholism would be on this end, where we run to work and then we neglect the others that got other responsibilities. And one of the challenges I'd give to you, it's not in your notes, or maybe it's not only, I think it's in your questions, but is that you guys would maybe outline what are your priorities. Okay, and we got the God priority, obviously, first, and we got, if you're married, you got your wife, and then you got your kids, if you have kids at home or whatever. Next, you got your job, and then I would say your church. And then, but just unpack those and see, that then you can see, okay, how is work either pulling away or helping, or, where my relationship with God starting, okay, my relationship with my wife, my relationship with the kids, with church, with my neighbors, whatever the priorities that you have put down there. Because the exigence is this pulling away from those things that matter and running into work. And it's also rooted in pride. It's pride of, I have to do this or I can't provide. I have to, I need this or I want this, or if I don't do this, it won't get done. And it's maybe driven by an over-identification with work. And then it, again, abandons responsibility that God has given us. And it's the idea I shared with us the first week, that work can't carry the weight. Remember the Eagles fans standing on the Ritz-Carlton, little awning, that it just wasn't meant for that, and it collapses under the weight. Work collapses under the weight when too much is put onto it. So this is kind of some general categories. One is looking for comfort and pleasure. That's a motivator for indolence. Maybe power and affirmation is on the exigent side. Let me give you a couple examples. Let's talk about indolence, a little bit. Scripture's full of examples, but here I give you one in Genesis 38, kind of an interesting passage. Verse 6 through 10, let me read it. Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. And Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother. The context here is Levirate marriage, where if a brother died, the brother had to marry his sister-in-law to sire a son, so that his name would not be erased from the history of Israel, right? So he could have the family inheritance. Very weird kind of cultural deal, but it's how God kind of perpetuated names and clans and stuff in Israel. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. Right, so the son that he was going to have, or the daughter and son, whatever, as long as it took, would not be his own. Everything he poured into this little guy would actually be someone else's. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste his semen on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death. Right? This is your common high school masturbation text, which has nothing to do with masturbation, by the way. But this was like the fear of God in the high school boys. God's going to put you to death if you do this. It really has nothing to do with masturbation. They're having sex. This is not a lonely dude. But the idea was, every time he would go into his brother's wife, he would not try to get her pregnant. He was in it for the pleasure, not for the responsibility. He's actually pulling away from responsibility and just enjoying the pleasure, and it's a move of indolence. And it infuriates God. And I'm not saying God's putting to death people because they're here, but the idea there is, here's a guy that just wanted pleasure above responsibility. He doesn't want to raise that little boy. He doesn't want to put money in that little boy. It's not his. It's his brother's. And so he's shirking responsibility instead of accepting it. And it's just a prime example here scripturally, and you can go through all throughout the scripture and see different forms of it. Whether it's 2 Thessalonians, a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. All these things. The church of Thessalonica, as we looked at a couple years ago, was they had some lazy people that were milking the rest of the body. Right? Some categories, if you think about it, like disability, welfare. Not those who cannot work. But that was designed for those who were unable to work, but those who just refuse to work. That say, well, if I work, I make X. If I don't work, I get X too. Well, why should I work? And so it's that idea of not accepting responsibility, just wanting a paycheck for doing nothing, not expending energy. Hobbies are a way that we can kind of creep into indolence, right? So I don't know how many of you guys listen to sports radio. So I'll listen to sports radio on my way to work. And in football season, this intrigues me. There's always there's a part of the show, usually, whatever show it is, where it's the fantasy sports part, right? And so you have these experts on fantasy. And these guys call in and they're like, all right, I got so-and-so or so-and-so this weekend. Who would you start? And then the guy spends 30 seconds explaining why you should start him because blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, these guys are putting so much thought into who they're going to start on their fantasy team that they call up a show that they got to wait 90 minutes just to get on the show, just to find out what this guy thinks of what running back they should start. And they're not, you'd think they're playing the game. You think that they were the coach. They're like Bill Belichick calling up, what should I do? Should I start Brady or should I start, it's fake work. And they're an expert on things that really don't, unless you are the running back in that game or the coach, it really doesn't matter how many catches he gets. And I'm not anti-fantasy sports per se, I'm not, whatever. But the being an expert on something that doesn't matter, but yet at the same time kind of shirking this over here. And sometimes these kind of things are what bleeds. And some of you are bosses, and you probably know, you got guys looking at their fantasy scores at work or watching YouTube videos or whatever it is. It's indolence, all right? Or another huge one that we see in our culture is video games, right? Call of Duty, Fortnite, whatever the new one is. Some of my kids play some of these things on the weekends. We're only allowed them to do. But it's the idea, it's a substitute for something that matters. And it feels like you've actually accomplished something because you went and took the hill, or you're ranked up, or now you're ranked number whatever. You got the accomplishment, and it's fake. Right, and it's the idea. It's just like pornography is fake intimacy. Video games is and it's a huge deal. When I was at church previous to this, and this is before games are huge now. It's $1 billion industry. But I had a guy up there. He's like 48 years old. Average video game player age, by the way. Do you know what it is? It might have gone up or down a little bit. What's that? 37 last I checked. So when you see like advertisements for video games at like 10:30 at night, it's not because they think like sixth graders are up. It's actually because their target audience is awake. Okay, that's kind of that's a sad deal. I mean, there's a lot of younger people that are playing too, but it's actually 37. And I'm not necessarily anti-video games per se as a whole, but this idea that this guy was a 48-year-old dude, and he was having marriage problems because he would come home from work after 40-hour work week. They'd eat dinner, and he'd go and play whatever game it was. And he was getting all mad because the internet was not working and this and that, and he couldn't play. And his wife was like being ignored. And that is super common, more common than you want to know. And so that's a huge indolence. And so a couple questions if you're thinking if you're falling into this side, when you go off to whatever it is, do you come back energized? All right? I mean, because hobbies are good, and we'll talk about recreation and rest, and we want to do these things. But when you come back from that, are you actually energized and ready to go to work, or are you just like, I'll be honest, I went to a volleyball tournament this weekend my daughter was in, thankfully it was here, and it was not restful. It was probably more, it was an escape, but I didn't feel energized when it was over. But that feeling of like, if it doesn't actually help your soul to recover and get ready for what matters, then it might be some indolence. If you know about more of this subject matter, your fantasy sports, than you do about actually working on planes or doing whatever, and this is what you're always talking about instead of this at work, then you're kind of creeping into that side. The exigence side is that overvalue. I didn't put a passage in there because it was too long, but if you have your Bible, let me read Ecclesiastes. Let me find it here. I can see, which I can't see. Just to give you an example of this side. Ecclesiastes 2. And Solomon, the writer, was the most powerful man, probably who ever lived. He says this in verse 4. Get my glasses on so I can actually see. Chapter 2. I made great works I built houses, planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens, parks. I planted them in all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest. So there's technology here. There's engineering here, right? I bought male slaves and female slaves. I had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I gathered for myself silver, gold, treasures of kings and provinces. I got singers, men and women. So he's got entertainment, concubines, the delight of the sons of men. So he's got multiple wives. He's with them, a different one every night. He got 1,000. So, he's kind of living what the world would say is a dream. So I became and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. So he was super wise too. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep for them. I kept my heart from my heart no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil that I expended in doing it. Behold, all was vanity, striving, and there was nothing to be gained. And here's a guy super accomplished. He enjoys building. I mean, he likes making aqueducts and walls, and it's rewarding to him. But when he's done, he said, where does it lead him? It was vanity. And if you jump down to 18, I hated my toil, which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. Who knows whether it will be wise or a fool? Yet he will be master over all I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This is vanity. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over the toil of my labors and under the sun, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This is also vanity and great evil. What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart with which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is a vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. This is also vanity. There is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. Then also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or have enjoyment? So this idea that he's frustrated because I don't know how many kids he ends up having, but he has a really bad one who splits the kingdom. Next, but he's got 1,000 wives, so he's got some offspring, and he's like, all this work I've done, everything I've accumulated, all the money, I've worked hard for it, I've been honest for it, I've done all these things, God's blessed me, and I'm gonna have to leave it, and I don't know how they're gonna do it. They could go off and squander it. They could do it. They could, you could leave the business to your son, and he could rock it, or he could be that third generation that blows the family business up, right? Which is the typical pattern. All this work, and I got to give it to someone else, and I don't know if they're going to squander it, use it well. He says it's vanity. So what's his solution? Verse 24, he just said, so just enjoy it. Don't make it the ultimate. Life can't be all about it, but just kind of enjoy it and be content, right? And this idea of overvaluing it, we saw last week, it's not permanent. We just saw it, right? It's not that you shouldn't try to leave an inheritance for your kids. If you can do that, great. It's not that you shouldn't, try to be generous, but in the end, you have no clue how they're going to handle it. They could squander it. They could, waste it. They could do something you would never do. And so don't put too much value, overvalue. Don't be a model of running to work. Which honestly, if we saw, most of us are, kind of, older now. We don't have any super young guys in here. If you look at the guy playing video games and the guy kind of slacking and, whatever, he goes out every night on a different softball league, and what we would say, slacker. But when we're looking at a guy who's working 70 hours a week, we're gonna be like, that's the man, right? That guy is getting it. And I'm not saying there's not seasons for that. That's not my point, because I know the Gen Jacks guys are watching on DVD, and y'all, old boy makes y'all work 70 hours a week sometimes. So, but we have a lot less problem as men, because we're like, yeah, we got to work hard, right? I can see that the lazy guy is slacker, sinful, right? But not, how's this guy? And so, just briefly talking about that, you ever, it's that whole idea that the pastor's kids are the worst kids in the church, right? We'll talk a little bit about that on Sunday. It's the idea that the cobbler's kids are always the ones that have the bad shoes, or the barber always has the kids that don't have a haircut. It's that ignoring that which is right in front of you to go out there, all right? Neglecting what's in front for vocation, for work. Running to that first, right? So when you're on a date with your wife and the work calls, that you always take that call. Or maybe you don't even get to go on a date with your wife because you're always working. Or a work call always trumps dinner or family, or and look, I know sometimes I get emergency calls at 7:30 at night. I go outside and talk. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but that's the norm, right? It might be you're finding your value there. Well, honey, I just got to work an extra 15 hours a week for the next year and a half so that we can, we got to pay for that car because you wanted leather instead of, vinyl, and we needed that. We really wanted that timeshare, and so I'm going to work 15 hours extra, or I'm going to do all the extra things so that we can have what God maybe has not had for us, right, at this point. And again, there's nothing wrong with all those things, but if it's causing you to sacrifice that which matters, yes, then there is something, then you're running there. And so here's some kind of ideas for both, and then we'll just kind of move into groups, because I think we can see what these look like. Indolence. Here's some examples that you might kind of be creeping into this. If you can't commit to the local church because you got to keep your weekends open because you got to recreation, right? Got to go to the Sea Island for we got tea times every Sunday at 8, and and we're there one every 3 weeks, so I can't ever really do anything with the local church because I got this, right? And what I would argue that the local church should be not the top priority, but it is a priority. If you ever missed church again or something like this because you're staying up late watching a movie till 2 a.m, a lot of young folks, I couldn't come to church, we were up late, or because you were playing video games till 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. You come home from work. Here's another one. Your wife has been with the kids all day, and you just kind of like sit on the couch for 3 hours, and it's me time. This is kind of my time. You kind of take care of the kids, and you bathe them, and you put them to bed. I need to relax for a little bit, right? Indolence. You call in sick when you're not really sick, or you're not too sick that you can't do anything. You are emotionally spent, and you're spiritually spent, but you're just not at night. You're not physically tired because you really haven't done anything. You haven't exerted energy. You haven't expended energy. You never make deadlines because you can't keep anything going. You're not given much responsibility because you can't be trusted, and you're fine with that. Right? I don't really want to kind of do too much. You're not striving to improve in anything, at work, at home, in any area. You lose your temper when your preferred area of recreation or amusement is disrupted. Man, the softball game was canceled. This is why, by the way, I get the question once in a while, why don't we have a men's softball league? Because we'll have 1,000 men join, and they won't be home with their wife and kids. And I'm not anti-softball. I played when I was young. But you want to go do it, go play in the rec league. Christian leagues are the worst thing in the world anyway, because the Christians just act like a bunch of pagans. So I would rather you go play in the pagan league. So if you do act like a pagan, at least you just blend in. And if you act like a Christian, then you actually have a witness. Because, the church softball league is always, let's pray at the beginning of the game. Okay, now we shared the gospel. And okay, now we can go act like a bunch of demons, right? So that's just, I never wanted to separate dads from their home. I know I don't play softball or anything at nights. I've been asked to play in the men's baseball league multiple times. I've been really wanted to do it multiple times. I think I actually could do it well, but it's just not my season. By the time it's my season, I'll be too old to play. But it just wasn't, because I didn't want to neglect that which is a priority. And so that's why we don't officially have a basketball team or anything. And again, if you're in a league, that's great. I'm glad you are. But I don't want to do that because I got moms that are like, why are you bringing my husband on 9 o'clock at night? Yeah, that's why. Because I get emails and I'll get yelled at, and I don't want to get yelled at for that anyway. But that if you ever use the phrase, I'm bored, I don't have anything to do, indolence. No clear goals in your job, no clear goals in your marriage, no clear goals with your kids. Just not accepting responsibility. All right. On the other end, exigence, because that's kind of more where we're probably at. You're always checking the phone, the email. You can't turn the phone off when you get home. You can't put it in the basket. You got to have it at dinner. You got to have it by your bed. Email. First thing you do in the morning, check email. Right? You're still working at home. You just have changed locations, but some of you work at the house, so that's kind of, but you're never able to shut it down, right? If family time is something you have to schedule, but then you just kind of check the box. Okay, done. Go back to what matters, right? It doesn't leave you any room for unexpected conversations with your wife. a walk, or even with your if you have teenagers, and some of those are they always happen at the worst time. So those are teenagers, and Bo, you probably know this is. It's always like 11:30 at night when you're like, oh, I'm exhausted, and the kids are like, they want to talk, and you're like, I just want to go to bed, but you can't because, or whatever it is, dinner time. You can't do that because you have work, right? Or you have your deal. You're constantly under pressure so that you have no margin for anything. If no room to mess up, no room for never. You have to, honey, I can't do this now, right? At work, if you don't trust anyone to do the project, you don't have any room to delegate. It has to be done by you for the way you would do it. You think that if everyone at work would be just like you, everything would be great, right? That idea. You're angry when someone doesn't think what you're doing is valuable, or they don't see the sacrifice you're making, and they're doing X, and you're doing Y. They're here. I'm here on Fridays, and they're not even here, and you're just mad. You can't go to sleep at night because you're thinking about the 15 things and your tasks that are left unaccomplished. And again, we have seasons of busy times, but if you not rest, if you don't ever get away, if you're working 7 days a week, more than a month, right, then you might be running into this idea, overvaluing it, finding your identity in it. Never take a vacation. It's a biggie for men. You end up with 3 weeks vacation a year, and you end up at the end of the year with 3 weeks vacation again, right? Because you always got the next project on the horizon. Value different approaches to work. You got conflict at the house. This is a big one for men. You and your wife are not. There's some struggles there, so you don't come home. You just stay out, right? You kind of avoid dealing with the issue. That's an easy one for us because we can just kind of put our head in the sand and just, I'll just work an extra 4 hours tonight. I'll get home, everyone will be asleep. I can just say goodnight, kiss my wife goodnight, and go to bed, not have to talk about it, wake up early, and go do the same thing again, and never actually deal with any of that stuff, right? Everything in your life is tentative because of work. Well, I don't know if I can commit to going to your baseball game, honey, on Saturday because I might get called in. I don't know, right? So just different ways of how we use work, we run to work, we escape, we find value there. My wife doesn't respect me, but everyone at work respects me. So I'm going to be on my game there because I'm the boss, or I'm in charge, or I got authority, and no one in the home, my kids don't listen to me, my parents, my wife doesn't listen to me. So I'm going to spend all my energy there, right? Because at least these people like me and respect me, and no one does there. So all sorts of little examples. Where does that leave us? Because the goal is not I know on the little scale there I put responsibility in the middle. The goal is not necessarily just get in the middle, but the idea, I think the gospel calls us to accept respect. And this is on your blank. The gospel calls us to accept responsibility and still yet have a healthy ambition in our work, right? You got an example, just real quick, in Luke 9. So here's Jesus. He's heading to Jerusalem. He's got to be in Jerusalem at the Passover. Why? Because he's going to be offered up for our sins. So he is under a time constraint, so to speak. Right? Jesus has to be in Jerusalem. He is in Galilee, which is to the north, and it's a long journey. And the norm would be for a good Jew to move south and then go across the Jordan River. Actually, for you guys, it's this side. They'd cross this way to the Jordan River because they didn't want to walk through Samaria because they hated the Samaritans. Right? So they take the long way around, and then they come back in and go to Jerusalem. Well, Jesus is not going to do that. He's going to shoot straight through. Right? He's got a place to be, a time to be there. He's got prophecies to fulfill and all these things. In verse 51, time draw near for Jesus to ascend to heaven. He resolutely set out for Jerusalem. He set fixed his gaze on Jerusalem. So he sent messengers ahead to the Samaritan village to prepare for his arrival. Right? Because he's got a little entourage, and they're going to need some place to stay and some food and things. But the people of the village did not welcome Jesus because he was on his way to Jerusalem. They don't want him to go to Jerusalem. They hate the Jews. They hate people going to Jerusalem. They don't like people cutting through. They want them to go around. When James and John, all right, the good apostles, the sons of thunder, saw this, they said, Lord, should we call down fire from heaven to burn them up? But Jesus turned and rebuked them, and so they went on to another village. Right? And so you have this interesting dynamic. You got the sons of thunder who want to burn their brains out, and you have Jesus who has a time constraint, who has to be there, and it's kind of important. He's kind of he can't be like, well, I guess we can wait till the next Passover. I mean, the appointed time from eternity past was then. But you see how he handles kind of this challenge of just even right in front of him. You see a domineering aspect of the sons of thunder, and you see Jesus just, there's patience and there's peace. And so we would say a healthy ambition avoids being domineering or disengaged. Jesus is still going to get there. He says, okay, we'll go to another village. Boom. He just kind of moves along. We'll get to another village. So he's not disengaged and go, woe is me, I can't go to Jerusalem now. Oh, maybe God didn't want me. No. Nor is he domineering. Well, just go, just got to knock them out because, man, I'm here for this. And they better get out of my way because I'm going to, it's neither. All right. The gospel frees us from escape because it removes the idolatry of ourselves. Right? It's not about you. And we talked about this in the beginning. And the pursuit of either one of these is a neglecting of responsibility. And we would just to be healthy to remember that all those things we talked about, the temporal nature and the frustration and the idolatry, it's not about, your work is ultimately not about you. It's a way of reflecting God, as big or as small as you may think it is. It's a way for you to honor God. It's a way for you to worship God, and that's it. It doesn't have to be more than that. It's not about, becoming the X or the Y or getting, it's not about working 40 years real hard, being on the one side such a hard worker, and so that one day you can finally be indolent. And just do nothing, which is kind of the American dream. Work hard for 40 years, be over here 70 hours a week, so that for 10 years of your life, maybe you can, oh, sorry, Jordan, I went way out of the thing there, sorry. I got caught up in the moment. So that you can go do nothing and be indolent for the rest of your, it's not that. It's, I can't, there's no like, okay, you do X 53 hours a week is appropriate. I think talking to your spouse, I think talking to your kids, talking to your boss, talking to other godly men. We got some great resources in this room, y'all, especially you younger men. We got some men who are further along in their career, they're further up the ladder. I think they could speak some super good wisdom into some of our younger guys. Like, hey, what does this look like? Your kids are gone now. Your wife and you are kind of empty nest. What is this? How does this work? That's the value of this room, right? It's not just this 30-minute talk. It's getting with guys, okay, Fowler said this. Is that true or not? Because he's only like 44 years old, and he doesn't necessarily know what he's talking about, which is true. That is true. I'm kind of in the middle of some of y'all. But the idea is value it because you're created to do it, but not overvalue it, and don't shirk it, right? And that's a fine balance. But if you find that you're walking with God, your priority with God is good, and your spouse, there's oneness, as we talked about last semester, right there. If there's those things, then I feel like your work will be in a healthy balance. Now, if your relationship with God's off and your relationship with your wife's off, the work is going to be either too much or too little. And the kids, and then the church is probably going to be all out of whack too. Or some people will run to church and do everything at church, but their house is a mess. And so we would say, hey, maybe you should go home. Maybe you should not volunteer at 85 different things. Maybe you should go take your wife out. So you guys can work some of these things out as you guys answer questions. Let me pray for our time. And then we'll go. And just, again, one more time, remember, next week we're off. So, Father, I just pray for our groups, that you would just sharpen us through them. I just pray that we would just be able to walk this line that is healthy, that is honoring to you, that is honoring to our families, that we would not overvalue, but at the same time undervalue. And so there's always a swinging of that pendulum, and there's correction, and that's why we're here, and that's why you've given us your Spirit through the body and through just the word and conviction, that you would inform our hearts of where we're at. And so just use this time to do that in Jesus' name. Amen.